Thank you all. It's great to be back in this lovely facility on this gorgeous day here in Palm Springs. It's even worse in San Francisco, so we can't complain. And it's very nice to greet you again. Thanks to the library for your hospitality here and for your wonderful venue to do these things in, and also to the Opera Guild and all the wonderful things you're doing to promote the art form. As you've heard, this is the number 2 out of 3 lectures that are scheduled, and the third one is February 11th, which is another Tuesday afternoon, and that is part of Palm Springs Modernism Week. So my topic then will be, I Hear America Singing, American Opera in Mid-Century and Beyond. So if you think that opera is way too Eurocentric, well, wait till February 11th, then we'll have a chance to counter that idea. So here we're going to talk about comedy, and I know that for many people, the whole topic of opera sort of conjures up tragic ideas. But here we're going to prove that opera is not always tragic. We're going to have some fun this afternoon. The stereotype is ladies dying of tuberculosis, like Violetta, or poor Mimi in Bohème, or getting stabbed like Carmen, or leaping off a parapet like Tosca, or stabbing herself to death like Madame Butterfly, or this happens to the men too, suffocating to death in a sealed Egyptian tomb. Oh, what a way to go. Or in Don Carlos, we have Rodrigue dying to save his good friend Carlos. Tristan and Isolde, they both die. He dies of wounds, and she dies of opera. And in Salome, poor John the Baptist gets his head cut off, and then Salome gets crushed for enjoying it so much. In our own century, Billy Budd, of course, gets hanged. Poor guy, he shouldn't have had to suffer that. Dead Men Walking, a much more recent opera, we have a convicted murderer seeing his end. So let's not talk about all that sad stuff today. Let's talk about fun things. I mean, the holiday season is upon us, so let's have some laughs today. So what I wanted to explore as I looked at how to present this lecture is what's actually funny in the world of opera. And of course, there are lots of things that we find funny in human life. Jokes, for example. I love jokes. Slapstick is funny, despite sometimes it's sort of a cheap approach to humor. Men in drag are funny, and we're going to explore that whole idea. For some reason, women dressed up as men typically aren't funny. There are lots of them in opera, but not usually for comic effect, but men in drag are. Wit, of course, is humorous. It just is, and when it's combined with witty music, even more so. Irony and satire are also great sources of humor. And surprise, incongruity, the unexpected, these things all amuse us. So let's look at all these things here. Jokes, for example. So a guy my age goes to the doctor and he says, Doc, I think I might be starting to have some trouble with my short-term memory. And the doctor says, well, when did you first start noticing this problem? He says, what problem? Ba-dum-bum, shh. So jokes are funny, but they don't really work in opera very well, and I'm going to explore that this afternoon. The reason being that the music doesn't have anything to add normally. The joke exists on its own, it's fine by itself, and music doesn't necessarily help. A lot of the times, it gets in the way because singing makes it harder to hear the words. Slapstick is funny. We just laugh at this sort of thing.
He was standing right here where you are. Was he a short, fat fella? Yeah. Dark hair? Yeah. Did you hit him with that? Yeah. That was me.
Okay, so we laugh at this stuff, and we've been laughing at this since the ancient Greeks or probably before. Here's a more classy version of slapstick from Goldoni's play from the 18th century, the servant of two masters, Trufaldino, has signed himself on to two different masters at the same time to earn extra money. Neither of them knows about the other's existence, but unfortunately, they both decided to come to the same inn for dinner. So he's trying to serve dinner to two different guys in two different rooms without either of them finding about the other.
Vai costui!
Assun qua,
Dove
assun
sei?
qua!
Dove ti perdi?
Vieni a tur di piatti!
Di altro da mangiare?
Adesso va la vita!
Spicciati che poi voglio riposare!
Subito,
No,
subito.
Beatrice!
Eccomi l'arrostone!
Presto il frutto!
Oh, mastro, furia, subito!
La nostra me lo porta a Cristo!
Ecco la frutta! Andiamoci!
Vai, andiamolo presto!
Ciapè! Ciapè!
All right, so this sort of thing is funny, and it can be funny in opera, but really under the right conditions where the music does actually add something and doesn't just sort of lie on top of it without any special effect. By the way, somebody asked me when I was showing this video, why is that guy in blackface? And I said, no, dear, this is Commedia dell'arte. They all wore masks. They were made of black leather, and it's, it has nothing to do with blackface. Men in drag are funny. Here's Charles Pierce channeling Betty Davis.
Darling, I'm sorry, I must have a cigarette. They say for every cigarette you smoke, you lose 2 minutes off your life. I should call my doctor and tell him I died 80 years ago.
If any of you had the privilege of seeing Charles live, he was brilliant. Here's another famous drag scene. Here's Flip Wilson as Geraldine.
Well, you gotta see it to believe it.
Well, you better believe it, because you ain't gonna get to see it.
So, yeah, there's humor in this kind of situation. And it's true in opera, too. When I did my talk back in September on the development of opera in the 17th century, I showed this apropos of the historical evolution of opera. Here it's more appropriate just because of the idea of men in drag. So Poppaea has conjured her way into the affections of Emperor Nero, and she's going to marry him. She's going to become empress now. He's dumped his first wife. And so Poppaea's nurse, which is a drag role in the ancient Venetian tradition of men playing older women for comic effect, Poppaea's nurse, whose name is Arnalta, is exulting in the fact that she now is going to be important since she's going to be the nurse to the empress. Going up by step there as we ascended the steps of greatness, example of what we call madrigalism in music. Here's Donizetti's Viva la Mamma. That's the popular title of this opera, where the stage mom, played by a guy, is trying to promote the career of her diva daughter and to try to put down her diva's rival. Here's a quick scene from that. All right, so we get a kick out of this idea. It's common in opera more than you might expect. The Witch and Hansel and Gretel, which was not necessarily meant to be played by a man he often is. We're doing it in San Francisco right now with a man in the role. In fact, it's this guy, Robert Brubaker, not in this production, but here is The Witch's Ride, as it's called in Humperdinck's Hansel and Gretel. And in this production, which is the one we did in San Francisco last time, back in 2004, I think, this version of the witch is kind of a nightmare version of Julia Child. As you'll see here, she's got this high-tech kitchen, and she's cooking up a storm as she's getting ready to enjoy a little cannibalism.
When up I spring, the bat takes wing, the hellcat sings, the death bell rings. My tongue's on wheat to taste the sweet and melting treat of children's meat. With 5 and 6, the witch will mix. With 7 and 8, you lick your plate. And 9 is 1, and 10 is none. So much is nil by witch's will. She'll ride until the night is through.
So the stagehands, of course, hated this production because they had to clean up this mess every single time. It was real food they were using. This is not the production that's happening in San Francisco right now. People hated this production because they didn't like the lack of tradition. Where's the gingerbread house? Where's the broomstick? Oh, we're doing all that now. But still with Robert Brubaker as the witch in drag. If you've heard of the phrase death by chocolate, that's what happens in that production that we're doing now. So let's get into the main sort of meat of Italian comic opera, which is where our wit and satire and sort of delight comes in the main part of the Italian opera, of the opera repertoire in general. Opera buffa, or comic opera, is where we'll concentrate most of our time this afternoon. Here is one of the early ones that still sort of fits into the Baroque style. We think of the Baroque style as serious, opera seria, as they call it, operas by Handel and the like. Here's a short opera by Telemann, a contemporary of Handel and Bach. Pimpinone's an older guy who has married a young woman, and she wants to go visit her aunt, and he's objecting to that because he knows that they will gossip about him. And in this little aria, he has to use 3 different voices: his own bass baritone voice for himself, a high falsetto for his wife, and a low falsetto for her aunt.
Su quel che si dice, su quel che si fa.
Sustrissima, come si sta, come si sta. Bene, 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 bene.
E poi subito,
Come il mio marito, i più stravaganti, pure in discreto pretende che in casa sia tutto il dì. Stravagante, discreto pretende che in casa sia tutto il dì.
So that fits into the Baroque style, 1725. It's a time when Handel was thriving in London, for example, writing his Baroque operas. But we were on the cusp now of a revolution in musical style with the Italians, and the forerunner was this young man named Pergolesi, who died tragically at the age of 25. If he'd lived longer, we might have had a lot more out of him. Here's his comic opera, The Maid is Mistress, and it's in this new classic style, which is more elegant, more lively, more graceful, much simpler harmonies and melodies, and lots of sort of wit in the way the music works, lots of repetition, and just general enjoyment. So here's a young woman who's a servant, and she wants to marry her master. And I wonder if she'll get her way. We'll soon find out.
Ingannate, troppo, tropinato ignorate. Io che Dio vi dico no, ed un sogno è questo qui. Sì, ed un sogno è questo qui. So we're launching a revolution here in musical style, and this is going to carry on in the Italian opera buffa world well into the 19th century, with the works of Rossini, which we'll get to in just a moment. But first, I want to talk about Mozart, and this is my favorite comic scene in Mozart. And if you know the Marriage Funeral, you probably know this, but here's the setup. We have the amorous page boy, Cherubino. That's a trouser role, meaning it's a role portraying a teenage boy, but meant to be sung by a woman for vocal reasons, for musical reasons. So Cherubino comes to the chambermaid Susanna's room to tell her that their master, the Count, caught him flirting with Susanna's cousin, Barberina. And now the boy needs protection from the Count's wrath. But the frightened page hides behind a large chair as the Count suddenly enters. The Count tries to woo Susanna, unaware that Cherubino is listening, and when the gossipy music master Don Basilio approaches, the Count quickly hides behind the chair, while Cherubino, unseen by the Count, hops into the chair, and quickly Susanna puts a coverlet over him to conceal him. But when the Count overhears Basilio snidely gossiping to Susanna about Cherubino's amorous flirtations and the boy's infatuation with the Countess, the indignant Count emerges from hiding, to Susanna's dismay at being caught with the Count hiding in her room, and to the nosy Basilia's delight. Here we Cosa sento? Ostinate, mi scacciate, il seduttore, trasformate, il marito, sono giunto, perdonate, o mio signore. Sono presa dal dedo.
I've seen the original play by Beaumarchais of The Marriage of Figaro, and the chair scene is funny, to be sure, but it's much funnier here because the music adds so much. It's a delightful exercise in Mozart's genius as this real action keeps going. There's no moment of stand and sing here. It's all action continuously going with the music adding so much to it. All right, well, it's time to talk about Rossini. Here's an opera you might not know about, even if you are a big opera fan. This is La Pietra di Paragone, the touchstone. And this is a precursor of Gilbert and Sullivan. As the music starts, you'll be able to detect the influence on Gilbert and Sullivan later in the 19th century. So we have the would-be poet Pacciuvio recites his latest verse, a dialogue of fishes. It's kind of a nonsense poem. And in this particular production from the Teatro Real in Madrid, it all takes place in a very sort of high-tech spa. Gilbert and Sullivan, right there.
Ombretta steriosa del Mississippi, del Mississippi, non fa ma resta qui.
Non passa, non toglia.
L'ombretta risponde,
Non passa, non toglia, non passa, non toglia. Su triglia di sfoglia, di posti così. Su triglia di sfoglia, di posti così.
e l'altra ripiglia, Felicia non triglia, Felicia non triglia, sì.
I'll skip ahead just a little bit, but this is another example of using falsetto for comic effect. Here's a little bit toward the end.
I passi restano dirmi così, i passi restano dirmi. Ombretta sdegnosa del Mississippi. Non far la ritrosa, ma resta un po' qui, ma resta un po' qui. Pip, pip, pip.
Qui, qui, qui.
Pip, 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 pip.
Qui, 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 qui.
Pip,
Qui,
pip.
qui.
Wow, I did not see that coming, did you? A little fun with Rossini. Here's another fun bit of Rossini from Hollywood with the overture to The Barber of Seville. Hollywood just doesn't make it like that anymore, does it? All right, let's go on to a little more from The Barber of Seville. This is the beginning of the second act. Count Almaviva is trying to get into Dr. Bartolo's house to make love and to woo his ward, Rosina, whom Bartolo wants to marry himself. He tried in the first act as a disguise as the drunken soldier. That didn't work. So he's tried a new disguise here. He's pretending to be a substitute music teacher to come and give Rosina her music lesson. But as in the first act, he overdoes it. He plays the part a little too strongly, and here he's way too obsequious as he greets Dr. Bartolo.
Pace, gioia sia con voi.
Mille grazie, non si incomodi.
Gioia e pace per Milano.
Obbligato, in verità.
Pace, gioia sia con voi.
Mille grazie, non si incomodi.
Gioia e pace per Milano.
Obbligato, in verità. Questo volto non mi ignoto. Mi siete dato voto, non ravviso non racconto.
Anche per questo ballotto.
Ma quel volto.
Un bel travestimento.
Non capisco chi sarà.
Più propizia ne sarà. Sì, propizia ne sarà. Gioia e
basta, 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 per pietà.
Gioia,
Gioia, pace, ho capito, oh ciel che noia.
prendi cuore,
Pace, gioia, basta, basta per pietà. Ma che perfido destino,
sento che non mi conosci,
ma che barbara giornata,
che sorti fortunato,
ma che perfido destino,
ah,
ma che
mio
giornata, ma che
re,
perfido destino,
oh, chi sta,
tutti quanti a me davanti, tutti quanti a me davanti, tutti quanti a me davanti, che
libertà,
ma che perfido destino, ma che barbara giornata, ma che perfido destino, ma che perfido destino, ma che barbara giornata, tutti quanti a me davanti, che moderna vanità,
Italian opera buffa, especially in Rossini, is the use of this rapid-fire patter as a form of wit, and it can be really very amusing. Here is another of my favorite scenes. It's a little different kind of humor from his version of Cinderella. So we have Prince Don Ramiro. He's been pretending to be his own valet Dandini, who in turn has been pretending to be the prince, so that the prince can find a bride who loves him for himself rather than for his wealth and status. And when the prince reveals his true identity to Cinderella, she is delighted, but her mean stepfather and ugly stepsisters are shocked and dumbfounded, and Dandini finds it all very amusing. So here we have one of these sort of shock and awe ensembles in Rossini where everyone's expressing how dumbfounded they are. Here we go.
siete voi, voi princi siete,
Qual sorpresa!
il caso è bello.
Dandini, of course.
Silenzio!
And now we begin essentially a fugue with each character coming in separately, and they have lots of fun with the rolled R in the word gruppo, which means group.
Questo è un nodo avviluppato, questo un gruppo ritrecciato.
questo è un cuento avviluppato, questo è un gruppo ritrecciato, questo è un cuento, questo è un gruppo, questo è un gruppo ritrecciato, questo è un gruppo. vola, poi s'arresta, ricomincia, delirasi, incomincia,
We could spend a lot of time with Rossini, but we've got to move on to Donizetti, one of my favorite scenes in The Elixir of Love. So we have the quack Dulcamaras come to town to sell his all-purpose miracle tonic, and the innocent, naive young Nemorino asks him if he could sell him a love potion like the one Tristan used on Isolde to help him win the heart of the beautiful Adina. And of course, Dr. Dulcamara's happy to oblige, and he sells him what is actually just a bottle of red wine. And poor Nemorino is fooled, and he's overjoyed.
Ehi, dottore, un momentino, in qual modo usare si puote? Un riguardo, mi avvenivo, a bottiglia un po' si scuote, poi si sfuranna, si para che il vapor non se ne vada, quindi all'altro lo avvicini e lo bevi, accende il vino, e l'effetto sorprendente non è tardi a conseguir, e l'effetto sorprendente non è tardi a conseguir, sul momento, a dire il vero necessario un giorno intero, tanto tempo sufficiente per cavarmela e fuggire. E il sapore eccellente, 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 e porto benissimo, obbligato, quasi obbligato, infelice son contento, e desidere di te lontana, benedetta chi ti fa, non ci vuole verità, non si trova, non si trova, non si dice.
All right, so a little fun at poor Nemorino's expense, but of course it all turns out well, as you probably know. All right, let's go on to French operetta. Here is a wonderful spoofy scene from Orpheus Enfer, Orpheus in the Underworld. This is Offenbach's spoof on Greek myth. You know that, of course, Jupiter's always turning himself into other forms, whether it's a bull or a golden shower of gold out of the heavens or a swan or whatever. In this case, he has turned himself into a fly. Pluto has hidden Eurydice in a secret room in the underworld, but Jupiter, who wants her for himself, slips through the keyhole by turning into a beautiful golden fly. So this is the fly duet.
Il m'a semblé sur mon épaule sentir un doux frémissement.
Il s'agit de jouer mon rôle plus humble car dès ce moment je l'ai droit comme bourdonnement. Je l'ai droit comme bourdonnement. chanson, la touche, chantons ma chanson.
Ah, la belle mouche, les jolis fredons. Bella, c'est quel est le doré? Veux-tu rester mon compagnon? Ces lieux dont tu forces à montrer, hélas, me servent de prison. Ne me quitte pas, je t'en prie, reste pour prendre bien soin de toi. Oh, je t'aimerai, mouche jolie, reste avec moi, je t'aimerai, mouche jolie.
And the wooing goes on, and, the French being the French, it gets a little bit racy. Ooh la la. All right, let's go to another little tidbit from French Grand Opera. This is Offenbach's The Grand Duchess of Gerolstein. Here is General Boom's aria.
Silence,
L'on se tait, car ma rigueur, on la connaît.
Quand il se fâche, on se tait, car sa rigueur, on la connaît. À cheval sur la discipline, allez, allons, je vais devant moi, j'extermine le bataillon. Le officiel et le vice-page, grand tonneau, quand il aperçoit le panache que j'ai là-haut, le panache que j'ai là-haut, oui. Et pif, paf, pouf, et à la papapouf, je suis moi le général, pouf. Et pif, paf, pouf, et à la papapouf, je suis moi le général, pouf, pouf. Et pif, paf, pouf, et à la papapouf, il est vive le général, pouf. Et pif, paf, pouf, et à la papapouf, il est vive le général, pouf, pouf. Dans nos salons, après la guerre, je reparais, et la plus belle pour me plaire, se met en frais, et le caresse ma moustache, en souriant. En ce moment-là, mon panache est fort gênant, mon panache est fort gênant, oui. Pif, paf, pouf, et à la papapouf, je suis moi le général, pouf. Et pif, paf, pouf, et à la papapouf, je suis moi le général, pouf, pouf. Et pif, paf, pouf, et à la papapouf, il est dit le général, pouf. Et pif, paf, pouf, et à la papapouf, il est dit le général, pouf.
All right, so it's a little silly, but it's inspired silliness. It's a lot of fun. And speaking of silliness, Offenbach had a lot of influence, along with Rossini, on Gilbert and Sullivan. Here's a very similar scene from The Pirates of Penzance.
When the foeman bears his steel, we uncomfortable feel, and we find the wisest thing is to slap our chests and sing ta-da-ta-da. Or when threatened with immutes, and your heart is in your boots, there is nothing brings it round like the trumpet's martial sound, like the trumpet's martial sound.
With the tears your grave shall water. Go, ye heroes, go and die! Go, ye heroes, go and die! Go, ye heroes, go and die!
Though to us it's evident these attentions are well meant, such expressions don't appear calculated men to cheer, who are going to meet their fate in a highly nervous state.
But off they go to face the pirates. And it all turns out well, as it happens to be the world of comic opera. All right, let's go to German comic opera now. Or better to say Viennese operetta from Die Fledermaus. Tonight, Eisenstein is supposed to begin his 8-day jail sentence for striking a policeman. His friend Falke persuades him to delay the sentence until morning so that the two men can go to the lavish ball at Prince Orlovsky's, another trouser roll, where there will be lots of pretty girls. Meanwhile, Falke tells Eisenstein's wife, Rosalinda, that if she comes to the ball in disguise, she'll be able to observe her husband flirting with other women. Her maid Adela also plans to go in disguise to Orlovsky's ball, secretly borrowing one of her mistress's dresses. In their trio, Rosalinda joins Adele in a falsely bittersweet farewell as her husband supposedly heads off to prison, as all three can barely conceal their glee at the delights ahead amidst their pretended grief. Here we go.
This hand is quickly silly, I'm going off my head.
I'm lying, feeling giddy, you'd better go to bed.
Farewell, I must go.
Until we meet again, until we meet again.
Until we meet again, oh, go to war with me. Oh, go with me. Oh, yes, a tragedy. Oh, yes, a tragedy. Oh, yes, a tragedy. Oh, yes, oh, woe is me. Oh, yes, a tragedy. Oh, yes, a tragedy. Oh, yes, a tragedy. Oh, yes, oh, woe is me.
And off they go. All right, so we've looked at French and German operetta. Now back to Verdi, not well known for his comedy, but his very last opera is a wonderful take on Shakespeare. And in this comic scene, Mistress Quickly helps set a trap for the lusty Falstaff by arranging a supposed assignation with Mistress Ford. If you know this opera, or the play, with the Merry Wives of Windsor, this scene normally takes place at the Garter Inn, an Elizabethan tavern. But here it takes place in the gentleman's rather posh club.
Madonna Alice forte. Ebbene. Ahimè, povera donna, siete a grazia tutt'ore. Lo so, continua. Alice sta in grande abitazione d'amor per voi. Vi dice che per la vostra lettera che vi ringrazia e che suo marito esce sempre dalle 2 alle 3. Dalle 2 alle 3. Vostra grazia a quell'ora potrà liberamente salire la bella Alice, povera donna, le angosce sue son crudeli, a marito geloso dalle 2 alle 3.
All right, so the assignation is set, and Mistress quickly makes a wonderful exit.
Mercurio femmina. Saluto alle 2 dame.
I love Falstaff. Another composer who's not well known for comedy is Puccini, but in Johnny Schicchi we get lots of laughs. Here is the situation where Buoso, the rich gold guy, is deceased and his relatives are now reading his will, finding out that he gave all his money to the monks in the monastery. That tune there is the theme of the will. Da, 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 dee, da, 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 dum, dum, dum. And of course, they hire Johnny Schicchi, who is a wonderful comic impersonator, and he pretends to be Buoso and dictates a new will, leaving everything to guess who?
Grazie.
Alla gita i poteri di figli.
Grazie, grazie.
Abbetto i capi di capo.
Grazie, cognato.
Annella e da Gerardo i peli tempoli.
Grazie, grazie.
E da Marco i beni a quintole. Lascio la casa di Firenze al mio caro devoto affezionato amico Gianni Schicchi!
And of course, there's nothing the relatives can do about it because the penalty for participating in the falsification of a will is to have your hand cut off and be exiled from Florence. Nobody wants that. All right, let's get to the 20th century in American opera. Here's Menotti's The Telephone, about a young woman whose fiancé is about to leave on a business trip, her boyfriend, I should say, about to leave on a business trip, and he wants to propose to her before he goes, but he can't get in a word edgewise because she's on the phone.
Excuse me. Hello, hello. Oh, Margaret, it's you. I am so glad you called. I was just thinking of you. It's been a long time since you called me. Oh, I cannot come tonight.
goes on in this vein quite some time. Let's skip toward the end here.
The pussycat, oh, is the dog, oh, I'm so sad. Goodbye. Yes, Margaret.
No kidding. Of course, the guy does figure out how to propose to her. Can you guess? He goes out to the phone booth and calls her on the telephone. If you Google the telephone aria by Menotti, you'll find a Miss America contestant singing it as part of her talent competition. It's wonderful. All right, we're almost done now, but further in the 20th century, here's Bernstein's Candide. The old lady, after many adventures traveling with Candide and his beloved Conegunda, finds herself in Cadiz, Spain. She tells of her diverse backgrounds and how she can easily adapt to new surroundings. I am easily assimilated.
I was not born in sunny Hispania. My father came from Rovno to Berna. But now I'm here, I'm dancing a tango. I am easily assimilated. I am so easily assimilated. I never learned a human language. My father spoke a high middle Polish. In 1/2 hour I'm talking in Spanish. Por favor, Toreador, I am easily assimilated. I am so easily assimilated.
We'll skip to the end of this one, too. Favorites to share from you. One from Jake Hagee and Terence McNally's opera Great Scott, which is a sort of a opera insider joke. Here we have Tatiana, a young soprano from Eastern Europe, is the second lead in the new opera premiere, and eager to make her American debut and to show up the leading lady, Tatiana misses nothing, including a chance to sing the national anthem before the Super Bowl kickoff just before the opera begins across town. But she can't avoid sort of adding her own take on the national anthem. So top that, Roseanne Barr. Okay, And another little bit from Jay Kagi, this time with librettist Gene Shear, his operatic version of the great film It's a Wonderful Life. So we have George dreaming of traveling and seeing the world and getting away from his hometown of Bedford Falls, New York. And in this satirical little bit, they talk about how sad it is to leave Bedford Falls for a dump like Paris. This is an amateur performance, but quite well done at Indiana University.
I run off to Paris with its uninspired nights, where in Bedford Falls is the city of lights. What is the Seine but a dirty little creek? Far Oswego is the river magnifique.
All right, so here is the professional version of it. The San Francisco Opera did this piece last fall, and here is that same number from that production.
In Bedford Falls, it's the city of lights. What is the Seine but a dirty little creek? Oh, Oswego is the river magnifique. Goodbye, Bedford Falls. Your mystery and enchantment have set the bar so high. Goodbye, Bedford Falls. How will you ever leave us? I don't know, but I'll try. How will I survive without a desk to say that I stay from 9 to 5? Let's see as never do. In each piazza, all I see is lots of beauties looking for a date. What can I do? Opera's my fate. Goodbye, Bedford Falls. Skyscrapers soaring, cool stories high. Goodbye, Bedford Falls.
That's the angel Clara. It's not Clarence, as in the film, but Clara. This is opera. She discovers that when she takes her hat off, she can stop the action, which is what happens there. All right, so that's our survey through the whole range of comic opera, but I'm going to end with my very favorite bit from Don Pasquale by Donizetti. So we have the aged bachelor Don Pasquale decides he should marry a young woman. To teach him that this is a bad idea, his doctor friend Malatesta, which means headache, arranges a fake marriage to Norina, who then acts the part of the shrew and an unfaithful nag. In this duet, Pasquale plots to catch his quote-unquote unfaithful bride in a midnight rendezvous with her supposed secret lover, and Dr. Malatesta pretends to go along with the scheme. Lots of patter, and this is a double patter song here, and I'm playing this because I love the performances, even though Geraint Evans, the wonderful Welsh baritone, is a little flat when he gets started, and you'll see he forgets his words a couple times, but it's still a lovely performance. I laugh every time. Here we go.
Aspetta, aspetta, cara sposina, la mia vendetta già s'avvicina, già ti preme, già t'ha raggiunto, tutte in un punto l'hai da scontar. Vedrai se giovine origini camine sorridi teneri ispira lacrime bagnaci dove non medici domino sorridi teneri ispira lacrime vuole prendere la mia vincere vuole prendere la mia vincere se non trovano la star se non trovano la star la mia vendetta già t'ha raggiunto tutto in un punto l'hai da scontar tutto in un punto l'hai da scontar tutto in un punto l'hai da scontar. Il poverino sogna vendetta, non sa il meschino quel che l'aspetta. Invano freme, invan s'arrabbia, e chiusa in gabbia non può scappar. Invano accumula progetica, invano accumula progetica, io non so chi fabbrica il castellinario, non vedi semplice chi nella trappola da semidesimo, si nella trappola da semidesimo, non vedi semplice chi nella trappola da semidesimo si va a gitar. Invan s'arrabbia, invano freme, e chiusa in gabbia non può scappar. E chiuso in gabbia non può scappar, e chiuso in gabbia non può scappar. La vedona sul ganghetto, sul ganghetto, quati, ci appostiamo, tutto, udil possiamo, tutto, udil. Gini camini sorrido teneri spirit lacrime medici di avene medici di io sono di teneri spirit lacrime vuole prendere la mia vigile vuole prendere la mia vigile sono favela la sta io favela la verità aspetta mi cusin abbia e il tuo online scappar cusin abbia non può scappar e non può online scappar online scappar Leider scappar, non può scappar, leider scappar, non può scappar, leider scappar. Don Pasquale, dottore, leider scappar.
That is my take on comic opera. Thank you for listening, and I hope to see you in February.